Right, I think we'll kick off. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sean Power. I've been asked by the gentleman to my left and right to chair this meeting tonight. This is an unusual meeting in that we have two candidates here tonight who have both been elected. Mike Jackson to my left, who is the Connétable elect for St. Brelade for the next electoral period, and John Young to my right, who has been elected, who is the deputy elect for St. Brelade No.1. I think the simplest thing to say is that we've arranged this, both have arranged to do this tonight and to answer some questions on a basis that I will explain in a minute. And they've asked me to chair it. And the procedure will be very simple. Each candidate will do a 3-minute speech, and there will be a bell at 2.5 minutes, and then a second bell at 3. I will then ask for questions, and each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer, and on that basis then we'll carry on and see how many questions we deal with tonight, and if it stops prematurely, we'll bring it to a close. So, I don't know, gentlemen, who wants to go first. Constable-elect Jackson, I think we'll ask you to go first. So, Mike.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Mike Jackson, and I've been elected to the office of Connétable St. Brelade. I was born, have been brought up in the parish, and my father worked at the airport in air traffic control. I attended Mrs. Benson's school on Paul Marquet, followed by Victoria College Prep, and then the college. I spent 3 years at Southampton College of Technology, where I got a diploma in yacht and boatyard management, and I've subsequently made my career in the marine leisure business down here at St. Albans. In 2005, I was elected to the office of Connétable and remained there until 2011, when Steve Pallett took over the reins. I'm now in a position where I plan to retire from my business, and thus I have time to devote to the parish. I'm presently a centenaire, and I'll be obliged to relinquish that position. However, I'm a great believer in the honorary police, and I have the greatest admiration for those who give up so much of their free time to volunteer their services for their community. Moving on to current parish matters, there's no doubt we need to sort out the area in front of the parish hall and its marriage with the road and the bulwarks. I intend to work with the Roads Committee to explore options for this area. There are 2 empty commercial premises in St. Albans, and I would like to encourage occupation of those by some sort of business, as vacant sites do little to enhance the area. This leads me to the rather sad state of Kenway Parade and the empty shops there. We must try and invigorate this for everyone's benefit, and I shall investigate options with the owners, the residents and the tenants. The question over what to do with the old Kenway school site is something that will require proper consultation as the new school project develops. It could be allocated to first-time buyer housing or sheltered housing. We'll need to analyse demand and costs. I believe we must enhance our methods of communication with parishioners. Parish assemblies are notoriously badly attended, and given they are fundamental to the operation of the parish, we must explore ways of enhancing them and involve more people in the decision-making process. And I'm open to having meetings to communicate, and will discuss with parish staff having a presence there at busy times. On more general matters, there's no doubt in my mind that we have some way to go with the implementation of the long-term care system. Like many, I have had experience of caring for elderly parents and understand the eye-watering costs that can accrue. I believe there needs to be better communication between social security and health so that families can understand more clearly what is involved. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you once again for coming down tonight, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I'll now ask John.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this evening. I lived in Jersey for 39 years, 10 of them in this district, I'm a chartered public finance accountant, and I've got qualifications in finance and management. And I've had careers in the public and private sector in the UK, Jersey and in Guernsey in finance, law, property, systems and planning sectors. I've been the practice director of a law firm, finance industry accountant, chief officer of planning environment for 13 years, and in Treasury and as a health service manager. I'm self-employed. I was planning officer for the state of Albany until last September. And you're elected deputy. I was honoured to be that position from 2011 to 2014. During that time, I lodged many questions and propositions, achieving a new planning appeals system, island plan amendments to protect St Brelade's Bay and neighbours from development, charities tax allowances, protected survivors' pensions, and gained tax relief for first-time buyers and policies for over 55 housing, and some extra funding for the environment. And I represented many people at individual hearings and appeals. I served on the Guernsey Planning Tribunal, past chairman and treasurer of the Jersey Arts Centre and many voluntary bodies. Now, I enjoy work and I'm not ready for retirement. And my commitment is that I want to complete the task I started as deputy in 2011, to finish the unfinished business which I've set out in my manifesto and my website, while supporting my work in this local constituency. My 10 policy priorities are to control our population growth, to reduce its unsustainable pressure on public services, make the environment a priority to reduce pollution, improve waste recycling, develop renewable energy and promote alternative transports, build affordable homes for our young people by acquiring and developing brownfield sites, assure our health and education services to meet the future needs of our community, and most important, great equity and fairness in our tax system. And our 0-10 tax system is unflexible and unfair and desperately has to be reviewed. And then stronger planning policies to make sure Jersey remains unspoiled for our children and our grandchildren. And that means improving the urban areas, halting town cramming, regenerating town and residential streets. I want to see that everybody can accrue a decent pension on retirement and stronger inter-island cooperation post-Brexit. Locally, work with a constable, with consultation on residents and businesses on car parking. I'm particularly worried about the safety of cyclists up Longley Road, and I certainly want to work with the TTS or DFI to see what can be done to improve that, and to make sure the planning law is strong enough to protect our coast, like in St Brelade's Bay, for example, work that I started 1 years ago. Thank you very much.
So you've heard both elected, successful candidates speak for 3 minutes. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask questions, individual questions, one at a time, and I'll allow a question and then each candidate to respond within 2 minutes. So can we have a question from someone? Senator Ferguson.
There is... Right, there is a new hospital planning application just been put in. I know you've been putting in some work looking at it. Please can you explain and comment on it?
Indeed. I'm aware of the planning application which we spoke of a couple of days ago. It seems that some of the teams that are putting the hospital forward aren't being very open about the way the process is working, and perhaps they ought to be. I'm not deeply into the project yet. I have to say my philosophy is that the matter has been well discussed. It's been aired in the States. A proposition was brought to rescind the decision to build it in its existing position, and that was overturned. So in terms of democracy, the decision has been made to build it where it is, and I'm inclined to agree with that. Do we need to overturn these things all over again? But having said that, I don't see why the process of building it on the present site should be covered up in any way, and one would like to know exactly what the process will entail. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A really good question. I don't think it's a question of overturning a state's decision. It's ensuring that what we've got, that the island feel confident that we've got a hospital that really meets our needs for the future, and that the cost is manageable, and that the environmental damage that is done, or the environmental negatives, because wherever put it, there are going to be some, are minimised and mitigated. And the risks are minimised too. Now the proposition that Mike has referred to sought to say, in parallel with the review of the current planning application, there should be a checking out of the information we've already got on the alternative sites, on the three front-running ones, which when one looks back, performed better than the current sites. And I think that would put the new states in a position of being able to make an informed decision. So we are in a planning process on, again, this variant. I have looked at the application. It is a very strange application because it deals with access only, doesn't deal with the same, provide the same detail, and they're asking almost, I would think, for a blank check. And I think there are a lot of issues about the effects on town, on Kensington Place, and overriding it, huge risks. And that is why I still want to see this checking out. I will accept this current project right if it's proven there are no alternatives. I have people ringing me up, staff, I have doctors talking to me, telling me they're really unhappy about this. The separation of outpatients from the acute unit is a disaster. Having worked as a hospital manager, I know that's a huge problem. Access for people with mobility problems, car parking, massive difficulties. You're going to see roads closed off for years. And the health effects of people having to live and work in that area really worries me. I want to think those things properly checked out. It's not overturning it, it's not overturning democracy. The decisions were made by ministers who are not staying. 3 of those ministers are going, have gone. And I think the new states and the new ministers should check this out before we sign up to the current site. Thank you.
Do we have another question? Introduce yourself for the camera.
Thank you. My name's David Lamarco. I live at the Kennervay. What do you think should replace the existing Le Kennervay school site once we have a new school?
Can we just... The microphone.
Sorry, you didn't pick up. Okay.
Thank you.
I've long been concerned about the condition of the Kennervay, generally as an area. We've had a lot of housing, but we desperately need improvements in that area, and I think certainly I agree with Mike about the need to do something about the Kennervay Parade. The school is going to add to, to that need. Now, what to do with the old school? I think, yes, it can be used for housing, but I think there are other potential uses that I want to see look at. I know there's a body of opinion that says move the parish hall to that area, and issues of parking here, understand that. But I want to see a use for the community checked out, and the use I have in mind is primary healthcare centre. When I last went round meeting to people on doorsteps, there's a lot of people of advancing years who need support. Community support for health services. They don't need hospitalisation, but they need that. They need access to paramedicals and doctors and GPs, and I think it's wrong that at the moment everything has to traipse into town and faced with traffic and parking issues when we could decentralise some of that. So I'd like to see that looked at. I know, looking back when I worked for health in the 80s, it was a vision that we would have primary health care centres in the east of the island and the west and in the centre. So you'd have practice nurses, paramedics working with GPs, and I would directly employ GPs at rates that government could afford, because there's no doubt in my mind the health service costs are unsustainable, and part of that is because we're not looking at our primary health care properly. But that's an option. How do we do it? Community planning exercise. Just like the waterfront planning, we have to bring people together, the community, we have to engage the community and come up with what ideas people want to see for that school, and we go with what the community want to see. All of those are equally valid. Housing, community use, parish hall, And there could be others that I haven't even thought for. What I wouldn't want to see is that building, which is an asset that government owns, wasted and lost. So that's my view. Thank you.
I alluded earlier to the fact that it could be used for either first-time buyer, homes or sheltered housing, and that's what needs analysis. I've no doubt that infrastructure will be looking at this, and they will have us more information than we have. I have a gut feeling that sheltered housing will be probably in higher demand in the parish. It may be that we have to have a bit of both. The sheltered housing we've got up at Don Farm has been successful for many years. There's been very little built subsequent to that. We've had social housing at Bellevue. We've had first-time buyer housing at La Sergente. So I have a suspicion that sheltered housing will be the thing to go for. I have a feeling in terms of John's suggestion about healthcare centres, we've probably got sufficient cover for that at Communicare. They are well, that is a very well-used centre. I think it's important to have consultation on the whole thing to get feedback, not only from the whole parish, particularly those in the area adjacent, because it's a fairly large, sizable site. Clearly, we don't want a massive traffic build up there, albeit I suppose the residents surrounding are fairly used to traffic from the school, so they're probably quite pleased that the school is going. So my view is that the parish should form a partnership with infrastructure in terms of providing either first-time or sheltered housing. Thanks.
Do we have any other question? Do you have another question? Anyone like to? If you can introduce yourself for the camera.
Good evening, Glenn Mitchell. Steve very decently introduced us a plastic recycling system into the parish, and it seems to be working quite well. What really annoys me is that the most valuable plastic has, well, they all have numbers on the back. If you look, there's a triangle with a little number in, and number 1 by far is the most valuable. And what happens is everyone mixes them together, so there's a sorting fee. So is there an opportunity here to actually have separate bins with just a triangle and the number by it that people can actually put it in? Because then you could actually start earning money, because it is valuable. And maybe that might reduce some of the, the costs of the parish. And obviously it'll be a lot more recyclable rather than just whatever happens to it. Because a lot of the plastics aren't so recyclable.
So your question to each candidate is how we would refine and separate.
I've been quite involved with recycling, certainly from my time in TTS and also initially with the parish. And I'm very pleased to see that the new contractor, in conjunction with Steve and the parish, has set up an excellent recycling system. The contractor is, from my experience, extremely open to all suggestions, and maybe it's for us to work with parishioners to encourage them to split up the particular recyclates more. It has to be thought through, I think, probably from the end result, which I think you probably focused on, and we have to decide how we get to that, perhaps without providing yet another bin. Our households are going to be able to cope with that, and it's really thinking through that mechanism of how we can get to that stage. But I agree with you. I mean, there's no doubt that if we can enhance the value of recyclates, it's got to be better for the island. And certainly the figures that have come from the parish so far, which were mentioned at the last, I think Steve mentioned at the last rates meeting, were extremely good and very pleasing that people are participating. So I agree with you entirely. Let's think through the process of getting to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think the parish has made excellent progress, and full marks to those who put the scheme together, but I think there's more to do. I think the issue of separating plastics, we are missing that out, not just locally, but in the whole island. One of my experiences in Alderney, what I found, is that people there routinely recycle pretty well everything. How do they do that? Well, plastics, there's a leaflet and there's a little book that shows you all the type of little plastics, the little triangles, and what's recyclable and what's not. And there's about 7 or 8 times that. I'd have to bring it along to quote because I'm not an expert. But there's the building that people can access 24 hours a day. They drive in their car They take their bag of plastics and they plonk them through, sort them out like that. And everybody does that. Now, what we have, we have a doorstep collection system, and there are limits, yes, Mike, about how many boxes and containers people can have. I find it immensely frustration that the hours of opening of our recycling centre down in town are so unfriendly. I've lost count a number of times I've driven with loads of stuff down there and found it closed, and seen loads of people similarly disappointed. And I think it amazes me, is it environmental that I drive down in traffic queues for half an hour to get down there? I don't think it is. So I think there is an agenda, a whole agenda, where I think we need to think recycling more generally in the island, be more flexible about it, and then with parish to go along with that in a manageable way as far as within our resources that we can do. Because it's really important, I think, we try and increase that rate. At the moment, we say, oh, well, we put it in the energy from waste plant, and we convince ourselves recovering electricity in that way is sustainable. I don't think it is. I think a lot of these things have a valuable potential, and we should try and use them. We don't have the problems of landfill, thankfully, that forces greater recycling, but nonetheless, we should still do it. And I think it sits with the environment being, as far as I'm concerned, pretty well one of our top priorities. People are fed up with plastic pollutions. They're fed up with a society where we have to constantly consume plastics that really should either not be there or be recycled. Any other question? We do from the current constable.
I think you both mentioned the front of the parish hall in your speeches. Myself, along with the Roads Committee, have been working with the scheme, but we ran out of time in regards to bringing it forward. But each of you, what would you like to see included in the front of the parish hall? And is there anything you wouldn't want to see at the front of the parish hall?
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. My ideal would be there's no parking out there at all. I just think that's unrealistic when we've got an administrative centre here that people have to go and visit and do essential tasks. So I think there does need to be the facilities for people to wait sufficient time to do their business in the parish hall. And I think it's really great that on special occasions, when on election day, for example, it's pretty well the only day that you can't park there, and it's great because you can chat to people and so on. But the solution to the bigger issue of parking I think it's going to have to be compromise. I really want to tackle the new infrastructure minister about his decision to give notice on the red disc parking area, so it can be made, in his view, into pay cards. I want to try and reopen that dialogue because that seems to be a retrograde thing. I know it causes the honorary police problems, but nonetheless, the ability for people to stop for short periods of time, I think, to be able to use the shops and so on, and people who are not particularly mobile is important. I think we have got to have a dialogue between the residents and the businesses, because we need healthy, lively businesses who need space to park, but equally the residents have got needs. We haven't found an answer. We're going to have to work at it. So I haven't got the magic bullet that I can put on the table now. But I'm absolutely clear that one of the quality of St Albans should not be spoiled by going into land reclamation. I think that was originally proposed. I think it's a real shame we can't do something about the landside car park. Be honest about that. It seems to be an opportunity there, staring us in the face. But nonetheless, we've got to have that dialogue again. Community planning is the only solution. Thank you, John.
Always a controversial subject. I think principally the first issue to overcome is as I mentioned before, the marriage of the new scheme and the old scheme. There's work to do on that. Now, what's the answer? Probably not. It's probably a question of tweaking it and getting the design people to meld the two. Do we want to change the whole of the front of the parish hall? Probably not. In terms of design and resetting of the seating or sculpture or maybe a water feature, it's largely subjective, and that has to be achieved by consultation. But I think the first thing to do is to ensure the safety issues are overcome, because that is paramount. There's obviously discussion about what are pedestrian areas and what are traffic areas. We've had the experience of the town park and the traffic issues there, and the unfortunate loss of a child there. We don't want to see that happening here. But what do we do about it? We've got to really encourage people to drive at a suitable speed for the area, which is very, very difficult. As we all know, those of us who are down here a lot, there are people walking all over the place. They don't know where they're going, and it's just so difficult. I mean, it's 10, 15 miles an hour really is the sort of speed that people need to be doing. And then we've got a major road running through the lot. So it really is quite a challenge. We've had various suggestions with regard to rearranging the parking round in St Albans generally, which you put through, which were the suggestions of the Roads Committee. And I think they're all admirable suggestions, but I think it seemed to be more than the public were prepared to stomach in one go. There's no doubt that people want to park. We noticed a loss of parking spaces on La Neuve route as a result of the new West Lodge buildings being constructed, and suddenly, because of splay lines, there are several spaces lost, and I don't think we can afford to do that. I will be certainly discussing at length with the Roads Committee how we progress this. It needs to be done, I think, sooner than later, and I look forward to producing some sort of project back to the parish hall again, back to the parishioners.
I see a question over here.
Would the candidates like to address the meeting on whether ministers should have an island-wide election success behind them, or not?
Thank you very much for that, and it's, I think, yes, they should have an island-wide mandate. Should the states be reformed once again? I'm starting to think so. What is the role of the constable? And the message has come through to me clearly from this time that the constables shouldn't be involved too much in the ministerial side. It's quite difficult. I've thought long and hard how I should place myself. Because I feel the constable ought to do something. You can't sit back and do nothing apart from the parish. I think there's an expectation. There is an involvement in the states in some form or another. So should it be a role on scrutiny? Should it be a role on ad hoc committees which crop up from time to time? And I think that's probably the case. I think we have a contribution to make. I see the constables as a stabilising body within the states, but given what I'm hearing from parishioners, I think the constables should remain out of the ministerial positions.
Arthur, I think the answer is yes, they should be, but the practical reality is it can't be done. When we had 12 senators elected for a 6 years term, there would have been no problems about that, because we would have had long-term stability of policy development, which these really big roles require. One can't, for example, transform a tax system successfully within a 3-year period. That's going to take a longer period. But one can start on it, so there needs to be continuity. So there are certain roles that I think there's no choice. We have to have elected senators in them with an island mandate. That is, in my view, the Chief Minister, the Treasury Minister, and the International Affairs Minister. I think all those positions are kind of set at a very high level that really require that. As you know, I myself stood down from my previous deputy seat in 2014 to stand in the senatorial elections when we had a reduced number, when it was reduced down to 8. There are 10 ministers in the Council of Ministers, and there aren't enough senators to go round. You can form your own opinions of the performance of the senatorial candidates on these elections. They are different every time. In 2014, we fought a full house of people which were, in my view, have fulfilled senatorial roles very successfully. although unfortunately the state structure has failed to deliver what the island needs and things went wrong. No coordination, no working together and so on. But looking positively, I think what we've got to do is when we know who's elected, I think the key positions will obviously go to elected senators, and then what matters is who's, the results of the poll for those positions. And then I think the new Chief Minister will have to look at what the skills and talents are in the deputies and indeed the Connétables for those roles. I personally want to see ministerial boards, because I still think that many of our ministerial positions are just too much for one person. I think it's ludicrous that one person is expected to run a health service. Mental health, elderly services, community health, general and acute, any one of those in any other place will have a team, not one person doing the lot. So I want to see a system whereby ministers can have groups of members to work with them, and that will help them perform that task. And I think better for democracy, more input and more help, more robust policies. Ultimately, I really do hope the state's structure gets reformed.
We have another question, please. I see the lady down there.
Caroline.
Gentlemen, would you be voting to keep the bailiff in the States in its present position, or would you be voting to have a Speaker of the House? And if so, the latter, where would that person be drawn from? Would it be the elected members of the House or someone else?
Thank you. John, you can go first. Well, I think it's my views on constitutional reform are well known. I think that we have, ever since we introduced ministerial government, need to look at the whole structure of the states. My personal preference is for one class of members, multi-member constituencies, but I certainly will not be prepared to be persuaded to go for piecemeal change, whatever it is. We saw what the states made a total mess with the senatorial changes. We had a good arrangement for 12 senators. They knocked it down to 10, knocked it down to 8, and now we're in a situation where I think it's farcical, frankly. So we have to change that. And we've got these issues arise about should other members take important roles and so on. So getting rid of the bailiff is not a priority. I accept that outside the island there is criticism of it, because it's not understood. We are an anachronism, if you like. And I know the same debate takes place in Guernsey. And of course, I've worked in northerly states for 3 years where there is an elected president. And the same issues arise. And so, directly elected president from the people. And so the same sort of, the only argument that I see that does give some weight, that it's cheaper than having cheaper to have the president of the states being somebody else other than the head judge, who's obviously very expensive. But that's not the most important thing. I wouldn't make that change now. I would want to include it, look at it within the scope of I think a Privy Council external review, such as was done elsewhere in the islands. I think it's time to do it. What are the choices? I think an elected member has to be an elected member. I cannot see you'd have a person being appointed outside the states. I know they do it in Northerly, but I don't think it works that well.
The answer to the question was bailiff in or out, and the answer is?
Well, sorry, I won't go for piecemeal change. So I will not be supporting a piecemeal change. So the proposition to say, take the bailiff out now, outside of all those other issues, no, I can't be persuaded on that. I want to have the whole lot looked at. Mike.
Thanks for the question, Caroline. I'm bailiff in. And that's really dictated by the fact that, in my experience, the ideal person to chair the states actually is a lawyer with considerable experience. And the alternatives would be to draw a lawyer in from the private sector. The greffier does it from time to time. I think, personally, that the bailiff is probably the ideal person because he's got the knowledge and the experience, usually as a former solicitor and attorney general, to know how the states works and control the membership in the best way possible, as well as representing the island. I detest being dictated to by other, or should we say other countries, as how we should run Jersey. Other countries are very often jealous of how Jersey is run. So why should we be dictated? If it ain't broke, let's not fix it. It's an interesting role, that of the bailiff as civic head and also head of the judiciary in the island. But in terms of conflict, it very, very seldom arises. And if it does, they stand back. And we saw that only this last week with regard to questions over election nomination papers. Neither the bailiff or the assistant bailiffs were involved. It was delegated down. They have the option to do that, and which they very often do, quite rightly. So is there a problem? I don't believe there is. So no, leave him very much on his present seat. Thanks.
Do we have another question? Do you want to ask a question? If you introduce yourself.
Richard Chapman, I live in the village. My big bugbear in this village is the amount of litter around the village at weekends. Everywhere else you go on holiday in Spain and there, they pick up all the litter at the weekends. They empty the bins at weekends, in the evenings. Our bins are overflowing and everything's rolling down the slipways, down into the water, and then that's where we get all the plastic and the bottles. Is there anything you can probably do about it?
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, I'm conscious of that. I think we lack joined-up thinking in litter collection sometimes. The parish runs a very efficient service. The public bins are not picked up by the parish, they're picked up by infrastructure, and they don't work weekends, which, as you quite rightly say, needs modernising. Now, can the parish contractor work with TTS to get a better solution for us? Can infrastructure, not TTS anymore, can infrastructure be persuaded to be more flexible in their approach? I think you're quite right. Having said that, I'm aware of having been involved that it's not always predictable. You get a summer sunny weekend, and yes, they will be full, but on a normal winter's day, they won't. So maybe one has to try and develop the pattern, the collection pattern a little bit better. St Blas Bay is a case in point as well. There are continual problems there, and you'll find the bins overflowing down there on a busy summer day. So quite honestly, yes, we are out of kilter, and I think it needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Well done, Richard, for raising that very important practical question. I think it's just, I don't know the answer to it because I'm not an expert in who does the rounds emptying bins. But I do see, I have been worried for a long time over how what used to be called our public works, public services department, then has become the infrastructure department, how it seemed to constantly reduce frontline services. And we've done that in the claim of saving money and outsourcing and so on. And what we've done, I think, we've put a lot of these in standards of the important sort of day-to-day practicalities that visitors to our island and we, really want to make sure are kept. Standards of maintaining our gardens and so on. Now, we're lucky as a parish because we've got a parish team, and those areas that are done by the parish don't fall into that category. But we have got this issue of the big brother, as it were, the infrastructure department, who I think at times don't really, are not flexible enough, just like closing the recycling centre at hours when people want to use it. And I think we've just got to have a dialogue with the new ministers. Ultimately, I want to see the parishes strengthened. I want to see more devolution from the big brother states to the parishes, possibly planning applications, decisions, licensing and other things, and this type of what I would call local services, which are part of the normal thing in local communities. And here where we've got a real high visitor use in both those areas, in St Aubin and in St Brelade, those problems are going to show if they're not attended. So thank you for alerting to me, Richard. I wasn't aware of the problem, other than, in the extent that you are, and I will certainly do my best to see if I can get an improvement there. And that we'll have open sessions again, and we'll see how we can get. In other places, I'm not advocating this as a major strategy, But community groups can often play a part in those structures to help fill gaps.
Did you have, go on. Clint, did you have a question as well?
You two gentlemen, when you assume office on the 1st of June, will have within your remit 90% of the finest coastline in the island. Is there any particular ideas you would wish to implement to preserve and maintain this jewel in our crown? Or perhaps to build on it, who knows?
So the question really is, Arthur, to...
What are you going to do with coastline of the #1 district of St. Brelade, the finest in the island?
John.
Thanks. Well, when I was a last member in 2014, I fought a battle with the states to persuade them and the planning inspector and the then planning minister that we should extend the level of planning protection in the shoreline zone of St. Brelade's Bay. We'd seen the, I think, extremely damaging overdevelopment in Zanzibar, and now we've got a similar situation occurring in the wayside. Now, I wasn't involved because I was working away at the time, but I have spoken to others who were working on that, and I know that it's been left with a lot of unhappiness, because having looked at the papers, I believe that the planning inspector who made his decision overrode that planning policy, the amendment I took to the states, and I think that was wrong. And I think what that says to me, I need to go back and get that policy strengthened. Now, how far would I go? Well, my inner self says, be bold, John. And one of the things I want to have in my head, and I introduced it in Alderney, and I think they're talking about it in Guernsey, is putting a maximum size on the replacement dwellings. So at the end of luxury mansions, that we don't have any more 20,000 and 15,000 single homes, despoiling our country, our coast, and taking the special places. Now that's very controversial. I know the development industry will have my guts for garters on that. But nonetheless, I have a dialogue with the community about that, and I think we need to strengthen those coasts because they belong to everybody. They don't belong to the very wealthy to appropriate for their own purposes. Now, that's my prejudices, but planning is about community. One can't get through a policy like that without debate, without rational analysis, without planning inquiry, and then ultimately persuading the states. In the end, the community makes its own choices. We get what environment we vote for.
Thank you, Arthur, for that question. There is no doubt that we've given scant regard to skyline development in the past, and we see it time and time again overriding the rules that everyone expects to be retained. We've seen the Portlet debacle taking off, albeit if you go back in history, what was built there has replaced similarly unpleasing buildings. If you go back to the holiday camp, there were some military structures there which were equally unaesthetic. So it does go back quite a long time.
You stand out quite so much.
I think we need to preserve our coastline. If we don't, it's at our peril, because once built on, we never get it back. But you have to look around here, look at the developments which are taking place, perhaps at the top of St. Omans here, Mont-la-Roque, top of High Street and so on. Are they lying in with what we've had before? It's a bit subjective, but there are some fairly grandiose developments which perhaps improve previous structures. I'm not sure. Once again, very subjective. We've seen buildings which have perhaps only increased, should we say 30 centimetres, I think, one of the ones at the top of Mont Arthur on the plans. But in fact, you suddenly find it's a massive roof structure, so the whole body of the building is far in excess of what was there before. Do we have as in St. Brelade's Bay, do we have can we stick with our seaside cottages and shacks as it used to be, as we all know, time passed? Or do we redevelop that? I tend to agree that the Zanzibar development has got completely out of hand. And spending quite a lot of time at sea, I look at these things from seaward, and that really tells you what it looks like. And you've only got to go out perhaps half a mile, and it really is obvious. And I really suggest that the planning committee need to do that to get a proper feeling of what looks right and what doesn't.
Could it be taken out left then, perhaps to sink?
Indeed.
I do have another question. Glenn?
Just to widen the remit a little bit, international protocols and things. Jersey is often said to be sort of like following behind other nations where we could be well in front. Take the Kyoto Protocol, for example. That's what we're still studying out, and it's obviously redundant with the Paris climate change, which Jersey hasn't signed up to necessarily. Isn't it time that we can bring Jersey up to speed and be ahead of everywhere else, because we've got this radical opportunity to really lead the way in so many areas?
So the question is, what should
Can
Jersey be
we
doing?
really start speeding things up? Yeah, we shouldn't be following. And how can we start leading the way where we should be?
Rather than following. Fine.
Well, I think given that we have the knowledge to lead the way, why shouldn't we? I agree. But there are always consequences to everything. Every protocol that is signed will have consequences, and those need to be thought through. The effect on the population of the island needs to be considered. I haven't got enough in-depth knowledge to say yes we should or no we shouldn't, but I don't see why we shouldn't be ahead of the game, provided it's affordable within our community. Now, clearly, I mean, you've got views over what we're doing or not doing at an agricultural level, and I fully support your concepts on that. I think we should be doing far more in terms of enhancing our reputation just with a simple usage of back on the fields, as I've mentioned in the past. We all know this is what happened in the past. We all know that's the sort of idea that people have. The Jersey new potato has rack on the fields, and provided we deal with the soil in the proper way that it can accept it, that's a great sales point in my view. Why aren't we doing it? But in terms of other protocols, I suppose we're probably tied into the UK. I've no doubt about that. But perhaps we should take advice on moving it all forward. I imagine it really probably comes down to a strong environment minister, so we shall see who comes next. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Glyn. I think there's a whole raft of policy areas where Jersey, the situation could change for Jersey. A change from having to be UK-led, as you say, to becoming much more in a leadership role, particularly obviously post-Brexit. And that's why one of the reasons why it really is important that our international development minister, our international affairs minister, is really fully geared up. I think they're so important. And so the areas are certainly on the list. I know, Glyn, you've got many ideas and you're working really hard on the question of doing things with the agricultural industry to try and learn from those ideas that are fast developing as a result of the Paris climate change work on things like carbon trading and so on. But there are other areas. For example, I passionately believe that Jersey has got a huge opportunity to become an exemplar in renewable energy. We have done absolutely nothing in that in the last decade. Since we brought a policy report, it's just words. And yet I think Jersey could develop a new industry, could become experts in both micro-renewables and renewable energies. I have to say though, we can't do that alone. We will need to partner up with the French on utility scale, partner up with the other Channel Islands, and again, that emphasises the importance of international affairs. And then there's things like green transport. I think with short journey distances and things, and the way that technology is moving of vehicles, I think there should be a whole agenda change of how we can link and make reforms in that area. And then I think I've heard from experts, much more knowledge than me, I've heard people talk about that Jersey's got a chance to be a philanthropic island. We can actually, with our new charities law, with the changes and the pressures on finance, which are discouraging money laundering and tax avoidance, that we could come and start to set high ethical standards, even higher ethical standards, which will actually be to a selling point, charitable foundations and all that. But in other cases we'll have to follow, like in building regs. We're doing pretty good in Jersey. Guernsey are well behind us. And so I think it's, we can't just be totally in the lead. I think on many things we will have still to follow, for practical reasons.
Peter, would like to ask a question.
Thank you. There have been a couple of phrases that we often hear. One is user pays, and the other is best practice. Could you both comment on where common sense has gone in the way we set out to do things? For example, to give you a start, DFI is increasing the charges for commercial waste dumping of green waste. Where do you think it's going to end up?
John, go first.
Well, I think the answer to your end question there, Peter, is fly tipping. Absolutely, that's going to do it. I absolutely, when I saw that, I was pretty shocked at what they're proposing. But I think the root of user pays is simply this. For the last few years, this island has run a strategy of allowing our population to grow in an attempt to generate tax income to pay for their services. That's failed. Our tax revenues are not meeting and not capable of meeting the needs of our health, education and support services. And so what we've had is we've had ministers trying to plug the gap with umpteen different charges. And so the higher issue is, that's the big strategic issue, Peter, that I think this state is going to have to face. How we pay for what the island aspires to. Well, I don't believe that growing our population works. We have to manage our population what we've got. We have to make decisions about the level of services we need and want. And then we have to have taxation systems and financial systems to fund them. And I think I think that's the agenda. There's some hard decisions in there. For example, just take the health service. How can it be realistic to think that we could provide a universal care system for free at 20% tax when the UK can't do it with a maximum tax rate of 45%, when other countries have got 50%, even higher? How can we expect to do it? We've got a social security system that doesn't have a proper social security scale of contributions. And we've got the 0-10 tax system that allows whole swathes of economic value to be generated by this island, for which the island can achieve no return to help pay for the things that we all depend on. That's a big agenda of work. It's a toughie. And I can tell you now straight away, I don't want to be finance minister because it's a tough call. But I hope whoever is works with members to try and find solutions to those, and it will take beyond a 3-year term to do it.
Thank you. Dump charges, I recall the debate in the States, which was a result of a proposition being brought by the former Deputy Leclerc, who moved that dump charges be brought, and they weren't before. The demand at the time objected because it was felt that it could stimulate fly tipping. Now, I think it started off with commercial dump charges, and we've still got that situation prevailing. I suppose you can argue that if people can afford to employ a commercial gardener to deal with their waste, can they afford to pay for a dump charge, which isn't great. Then, of course, you can argue that the green waste which is dumped at La Colette is actually turned into compost, which can be sold, so that could be offset. Fly tipping, I think, is an issue which is going to probably get worse than the island as things get tighter. You talk about best practice. Well, it's a bit of a broad term, isn't it? There's a best practice of doing lots of things, and that's open to interpretation. My best practice may not be the same as yours, and maybe not the same as the one over there. So it is very much a question of, I suppose, experience gained from other professional bodies. Shall we say best practices ought to be peer reviewed by others from time to time. Clearly there are practices in the island which are out of date and need to be reviewed. There's got to be a better way of doing things, and to which we should aspire, and I don't see anything wrong with that. We can't continue encouraging poor practice if it's a question of in whatever sphere you happen to be in. So I suppose I think I'd conclude by saying that there is a cost to everything. Departments are all trying to offset their outgoings. I'm more inclined to look how they might save costs so they don't have to charge the public. I must admit that's my route on all these things.
Peter, are you okay? Sarah, question?
Coming back to parish matters and giving a thought to the fact that one of the articles I was reading recently identified the Bay as a sort of hotspot for high net worths to come and settle. And given the fact that the planning department totally annihilated any attempt to do a long-term development plan for the Bay, how will either of you or both of you get it back on the agenda to deal with before the Bay becomes like sandbanks?
Thanks very much. It's difficult to control immigration from that point of view. We all know the value of high net worth individuals to the island generally. There are exceptions, clearly. I think you're absolutely right. The Bay plan seems to have been overridden time and time again. I do believe if we've got a plan, we ought to stick to it, and I, like you both, sat through the 2010 or 2011 island plan debate at length, and it was thrashed through. It really was, I'm sure you'd agree, and it annoys me now when we see the plan being overridden roughshod. I'm not saying it should be cast in stone, but the principles seem to be being tampered with, and the St Brelade's Bay plan, the St Albans plan, which was brought as well, seems to be somewhat disregarded. So yes, I think there ought to be an adherence to that. Properties do need improving, but I think John's suggestion where perhaps controlled size of plot may be something to consider. I think the St Brelade's Bay residents need to be cohesive about it, probably together with the commercial operators down there, so there is some sort of firm goal, so that the environmental department, the planning department, can understand what people actually want. This may be where we're missing out. There may be not enough cohesive direction, and I would look forward to trying to draw that together.
I think you know when I'm said what I've said about the restricting the size of dwellings. I'm afraid I think we have put far too much stress as an island on this high net worth resident strategy. I think I've seen, I'm sorry to keep referring, but I've seen in Alderney where they have high net worth residents who go there because they make low impact on their environment. In Jersey, we seem to attract those who want to make high impact on our environment and don't recognise the fragile nature of small island communities and how the nature of them so quickly change. And in a way, when you look what do high net worth people want, generally speaking, these are people that have multi-premises all over the world, in Monaco or in the West Indies or somewhere all over the world. They don't actually spend a great deal of time in those homes. Most of those mansions are empty apart from staff that they leave behind. And yes, they get economic value if they form businesses that put money into the local economy, but sometimes they don't. And I'm not convinced that I'm seeing that these kind of processes where we make those choices as a community we got it right. How do you change that were the planning rules. As I say, you can only do it through collected processes. Yes, through the St Lawrence Bay people. They have the community through proposing and setting policies, or bringing policies forward, but which we can get through the island plan. There's another side of this. The changes that were made to the planning appeal system, in my view, have not worked well. Myself and Senator Balash were the only ones to vote against them for different reasons. I was very unhappy with the notion of a single inspector making a judgment, as has happened in the St Brelade Bay, making a subjective judgment, setting policy. In Guernsey, when I was a member of the Guernsey Planning Appeal Tribunal, I set the process up where there was a tribunal of 3. And I think where you have a greater balance on that, you've got more chances of having sustainable decisions than what we have now.
Do we have any other question? Any more questions?
You've both mentioned that the precinct at Le Kennevet is perhaps looking a little tired, although I think we should say there are some excellent businesses there providing very, very good service. But what sort of ideas, thoughts you have as to how we can spruce the precinct up and ultimately get to a position where it's fully let again?
John, you can go first on this.
Yeah, I'm frustrated by it because Le Kennevet, it looks like a tired 1960s estate, and it's got such potential. Because look at the size of the community now we have in the West. Planning decisions all the time and putting new residences here. People are getting older. There's a strong case for local retail. Why should everybody have to go into town? We should become more. And I think that needs facilities, and that's... now, I don't understand why the landlord has seemed to a situation where they just hang on to charging rents that can't be sustained in the current retail market, and they become empty shops. Nobody gains by all that. So what would you do? Well, the drivers there, you have to have a mix of commercial use with, on ground floor level, what they call active frontages, with residential development. I think there is scope for increasing the residential development there very significantly, and as a result of that have improvements in the public realm, which is, you know, the open spaces, places where people can sit and chat and so on, like a village sort of school. You know, all those things, they have to come out of planning processes. And if this is an issue that the community, because it's not in my district number 1, it's a district number 2, but if it's an issue that the people in that district put to the constable, I have my full support to work on a community planning exercise, and where we're getting money. We're asked the planning minister, we want some money, because community planning exercises cost professional teams. We get that resource in, we work with the community, we start to develop some ideas. There has to be dialogue with the private owners to achieve that. Ultimately, I'm afraid there's some cases you even might have to use compulsory purchase. When I did development plans of Springfield, I had to, as a civil servant, I drafted compulsory purchase powers to make us achieve that. It can be done, but it has to be driven by the community, and I think that's what we need to start looking at, if there is a wish.
I think it's your question's very pertinent, because it really is sad up there, and once again, as I mentioned down here, empty shops don't do anybody any good. For a business to operate, and there are some good businesses there, but it has to be sustainable, and the sort of rents that are being asked are not sustainable for the sort of businesses that are going to operate in that area. The difficulty is that some of the flying freeholds have been sold to for accommodation. So there's a mix of flying freehold, there's a mix of rental plus commercial rental. And I think the only way forward, and I don't know what the status is with the owners, but I think we have to have discussions. There has to be some three-way discussions between the owners, ourselves as the authority, and the owners or the owners' agents. And until we do that, we're not going to get anywhere. Then we need to get some sort of results out of it. It's just been going on too long. We've had parking issues there, all sorts of things. One section seems to be closed off because it's falling down. So there has to be movement. And I'm sure if the owners have got any commercial sense, they'll want to maximise their return. They certainly can't be doing that at the moment. So I'm determined really to move forward on that, and we'll strike up meetings as soon as I can to develop some improvement if we can, or get some plan, some target, some goal to get things moving. Thanks a lot.
Another question?
Slightly wider question about health. Do you think we need to change our approach to the way we look at health in the island in regards to, rather than being reactive, being a bit more proactive in regards to any programs we could bring forward? And I say that in regards to some of the initiatives that I've been putting forward in regards to a more active Jersey. So do you think there's opportunities to be more proactive on the health side, more investment in health prevention, so that there can be benefits further down the line in regards to savings to the health service?
Absolutely. I think we tinkered with it, and that there's a, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a programme at the fort which was Active Jersey, and clearly there's room for development on that. I know my daughter worked up there for a time, and whether it be activity at the fort, whether it be ball games, whether it be swimming, it's got to be the right way to go. We see so much use of the hospital as a result of, should we say, self-inflicted problems, which have been as a result of lack of exercise in earlier life. We hear about obese children. That can't be right. Maybe it's a result of children being stuck behind screens all the time, and I think there is a tendency to do that. We need to get them out. We need to get them doing sport of one sort or another. I've got a bit of experience, obviously, with sailing down here and seeing the youngsters get out to the fort and get active is so important. And I spoke to Mark Capern last night, the head of the youth service, to suggest that we need to improve the sailing offering for the general public because it's pretty weak. And that's my interest, and I know we've all got different interests in different sports, and I think they all need to be encouraged to get the children doing something. It's got to be better for them.
Steve, I absolutely agree. I don't think this is an area that Jersey has done very well. Our health service goes back to the 60s. We've never been able to link up primary health care with secondary health care. They're treated as completely separate tasks. And all the secondary health care system can do is to be what you call a gatekeeper on whatever treatments. They do treatments. Cynics might say that's what doctors do. They earn their living by treatment. But we've got to, as a society, move away from that. We've got a very small but very effective little health promotion team who sit within health, whose budgets are minuscule, receive zero priority. They've done pretty well despite that in trying to persuade people. The dreadful situation of smoking, as an ex-smoker myself, smoking, the tobacco industry is the only industry that has to generate new customers because it kills its customers. And how to have that situation go on. Alcohol consumption is just unbelievable. And if I had my way, I would make sure that the only places that could sell alcohol would be licensed outlets. I would remove them from supermarkets, as they are in Alderney, and people use licensed output, and there is much less abuse, and I would take high tax off them. Because we just cannot go on, because I think it's 40 or 50% of the illness treatments in Jersey are related somehow to alcohol. And then we've got issues of walking and cycling. Cycling is dangerous still in Jersey. We want to encourage people, young people, to walk, cycle to work, and yet the roads are we're still not giving priority to walkers and cyclists. So I certainly think there's a whole agenda there. I went to Jersey in transition the other night, very exciting. There's a lot of people in Jersey really keen to do some real practical things. real practical measures to try and do something. So Steve, full marks to you. You are an exemplar in this. You've done extraordinarily well. Keep at it, please. And see if we can get the youth service properly funded so that we can, all young people should have access to this right from the off. It's too late for my generation, probably, but for the young ones, it's great.
Do we have another question? Still going to keep going?
Go back to parish. You mentioned curbside recycling before. I know Mike started it off, but I was fortunate that one that brought it in was the curbside recycling in St Brelards. But 6 parishes currently recycle, 6 don't. What would you do to encourage them to recycle? And if they're not prepared to do that, what would you want to see to ensure we've got an island-wide recycling system?
Well, first of all, I hope that our new infrastructure minister, whoever he or she is, develops a good rapport and a frank exchange of communications with the Committee of Constables. I think you've got to have a carrot and stick philosophy. There will be always in life, I think you want to achieve something, you've got to have both those things. Trying to give people incentives, try to help, encourage. If they don't do it, then you hit them with a stick. And my stick would be to introduce law changes and financial penalties somewhere in the system. And that's the context. I don't know enough about it, to be frank, but I think that that's probably an example where I think that yes, we're going to have to. I think we should devolve more to the parishes, but I don't think we can have outside of any overall policy context. There needs to be a policy context in which parishes work. There's nothing to stop, in my view, parishes joining together and working together. Join things like it's been done in the UK. If there's issues of practicality and efficiency and cost and so on, that can help. So again, I don't think you can achieve anything without joined up thinking, joined up communication, and I'm really hopeful that under the new Charlie Parker situation, that we'll get some of these barriers that have stopped us doing things broken down.
I think it's down to parishioners. Now, it's the parishioners that drive the parishes, and clearly in the parishes that don't curbside recycle at the moment, the constable hasn't pressed the issue. One has to bear in mind there is a cost, and we know in this parish the additional cost is not insignificant, and that's the cost on the rates. So provided that parishioners are prepared to go to their parish assemblies in June or July and say this is what we want, and they're prepared to accept the increased cost and the rates, there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't do it. I'm not sure how many collection contractors there are on the island. There's only on 12, I know probably about 6. So some contractors do several parishes. Maybe they're the ones being reticent, I don't know. But certainly the experience in this parish is that the contractor seems to have managed the whole situation very well, apart from perhaps splitting up the plastics, which we need to talk about. But it's for parishioners of other parishes to drive their constable at the parish assemblies to move in that direction. So to be positive, they need to get some costs in before the parish assemblies, so the assembly can consider that and vote it in if they wish. I'm not keen on an all-island rubbish collection. This has been spoken about before, because little is beautiful, I think, very often, and far more controllable. We'd end up with it being highly unionised, it'd be more inefficient, whereas our present system works very well, certainly here. And I think if other parishes could emulate what we've got, and I think they're probably quite jealous, they'd do better. So I suspect it's probably down to the quality of the contractor, and they may need encouraging at all. But as I say, the drive has to come from the parishioners themselves.
Do you know the names of the 6 parishes that don't recycle? Do you know off the top of your head? For those in the room?
No. I have to start waffling around a bit, so I'm not going to go.
Do you know St Helier?
So how do you do? St Brelards do, St John's do, St Peter's don't, St Warren's don't, St Mary's don't, Brewville don't, St Saviour's don't.
St Mary's used to.
But I think
Okay.
St Mary's used to.
well, there may be one of them that do them.
Okay, good question. Any other questions, Sarah?
Yes, talking about, we're going to have a lot more elderlies, more elder people in the population.
Just say aging population.
No, I just say there's going to be a lot of elders like us sitting here. That lot on the platform. Basically, why are all the receptacles for your recycled newspapers and this, that and the other, why don't we do them with wheels?
Definitely answer that
There's no doubt about it. When your newspaper receptacle is full, it's heavy. Some of us perhaps take more newspapers than others, but the Evening Post has its weight. It's probably down to stowage, if I can use a nautical expression. Where do you put them? And it's an issue with a lot of people with flats maybe upstairs and space. There's no reason why they couldn't have. You can get those small receptacles with wheels if one wishes. Perhaps in your case a green wheelie bin might be adequate. But there's no reason why the bins could not change in design. I'm not sure quite the process of getting them into the back of the truck. I think they're of a size and weight where they can be flicked up by an individual. So there probably has to be a weight restriction in all reasonableness if you consider best practice and how much you might pick up. So a tub full of newspapers is probably that weight. So I think any suggestions with regard to how we might improve or make recycling easier have got to be gratefully received. And as I said earlier, the contractors are very receptive to all ideas.
John. Recycling on wheels.
Recycling on wheels. I'm not a great expert on this. In fact, I'm cute. I always leave the lid off and the thing gets full of wet, and then I have to run around in the wind trying to pick them up when the stuff's gone everywhere. So I'm not the greatest fan of the current boxes, but obviously practicalities dictate here. Question, I'd ask you, I don't know this, other people better do it, more informed than I, and will do. What do other places do? What sort of designs do they use? Do they use these type of boxes? Because it strikes me being, if there's a general need for some kind of appliance that's easy to use for recycling, there's a design opportunity for somebody. Somebody might be able to make some money out of it. Don't know. But I'd look elsewhere. And it takes me back to the ideas when I worked for the planning years ago, when we had a problem with telephone boxes. People with disabilities couldn't get in them, and you couldn't buy anyone on the market. So what did we do? We designed one. And then now they're used all over Europe. That design was taken on board. But so design opportunities from them, I don't know. I bow to the experts.
Not telephone boxes. Okay. Right.
Last one.
Right. Okay. We're trying to wrap up at 9.
Just a quick one on green waste. It's been mentioned about the DFI composting side of things is expensive, but also they won't receive or they won't take in coffee grounds, for example, which is ridiculous. What is the members' view on maybe the parish doing a green waste system? Because I think there is a need for kitchen waste and stuff to be recycled, but we can't do it at the DXI sites.
Well, Glenn has shared his ideas with me and told me, and I wasn't aware of this, that there is all the coffee shops in the island are looking for facilities to recycle that material. And at present it goes into the energy from waste plant. If it's recyclable, I think we should be trying to find ways of using it, because there's obviously quite a big volume there. Could we go satellite composting that, or is it best done centrally? That debate has happened several times over the years, and we've ended up with centralised composting, because previous satellite attempts have ended up in sites that have polluted the land. For example, at Grabay, where they were putting timber with arsenic in, which is tannalised timber, which when it decayed released the arsenic into the ground, which then formed a plume into the ground. Obviously, that was an unintentional thing, but obviously those sort of things need to be avoided. So I think I certainly think pilot projects, and certainly I think if there are issues that the current DFI composting operation is not meeting the potential, there should be a dialogue with the infrastructure minister to try and to improve that. And if it needs to be contracted out to private contractors to do it, to try and get a take-up of things, so be it. In the long term, I personally would like to see if we can deal with the issue of the fuel farm and ultimately locate it in the very long term. I think the potential of La Colette needs to be opened up for development for the island's needs, and that would mean that the composting site would not stay there permanently. I think it's an interim use, which is useful, but it shouldn't be seen as a permanent one. So I think in time we can perhaps move towards, once we learn more, once we've got more people who can make these things work and make them pay, that's the opportunity.
Thanks, Glyn. The location of the composting site was discussed at length at the time, and the slab was put down probably about 10 years ago. There was a suggestion then that there should be a site in the west, central and east, so that people didn't have so far to go, which was logical. And I think the site put forward for the west was at So Falloway, where there was a States field just opposite the what was Aviation Bopal, Gamma Aviation. It met with furious objection by the residents of the area, and so it all got drawn back into La Colette. So I think if we were to go down that route, we'd end up with residents of Close Holloway kicking off again, if I can use that word, who wants a composting site on their doorstep. I think at that time there were more issues about smell and so on, and I think that's been overcome quite considerably. But that was the local objection. So I think given one could overcome that, it might be achievable. Clearly, everything in terms of transport, everything going to La Colette isn't ideal. If we can have localised composting areas, so much the better. I suppose there is a staffing issue and cost of running it issue. As you know, it's all got to be turned and maintained. So I think at the end, the single site proved to be the most economic. Coffee grounds, and I've got a peripheral knowledge of what was involved, and I have read information about that. I don't know what the argument is for not recycling them. There must be one, I presume, but in chemical, technical terms, I don't know what it is, but if there is benefit to recycling them, why don't we do it? And I'm quite happy to pursue that one. Thank you.
Arthur, did you have a question?
You have a choice, fill in St Irwin's Harbour or tip north of the arm here to reclaim some land in St Irwin for car parking and high-class residential development.
Well, having discussed this at significant length in 2008 or 9, I think the conclusion of the community was that we didn't want to fill it in at the moment. It wasn't forever. So I think subsequent to that, a former Minister for Transport and Technical Services put out the idea that there might be some enabling development. And I have to say that didn't go down at all well from my judgment. In terms of filling in the harbour, I'm probably not the best to comment on that because I'm a boating man and would find that the harbour filled in would preclude sheltering of boats and I think would bring up significant objections from those who keep their boats in harbour. So what do we do about it? And the Roads Committee have been in battle for many years trying to make the best of what we got, and that's really, I think, in all truth what we can do. The landslip was, car park was mentioned. It caused considerable objection from those living next door and above, which would need to be overcome if one wanted to put a multi-storey car park in there. There are covenants on it which restricts its use, so there would be a lot of battles to fight before one could achieve much, and I'm not sure whether it would be cost effective at the end of the day. So I'm afraid we're stuck with what we've got, and I think if we can tweak and improve little bits here and there. There are a couple of areas which could be looked at, which have been proposed by some. That's probably the best we can reasonably do and achieve. Thank you.
John? Well, a tough ask. I haven't been sworn in yet. I've already had the number one question for St Owen's. I think you can see what land reclamation does when we look east and look at St Helier and La Calette. And the clues are there. I was certainly around, I think I can remember those times, I'm sure we all can, and we saw the despoilation and damage that went on for years while those projects were done, the land reclamation projects. And of course, they're so big because they need to be to pay for it. Because if you're going to do land reclamation in marine conditions with 40-foot tides, you need expensive engineering, and in order to justify that, you need to enclose large areas of land. So any notion of doing nice little, small little pockets here is not, in my view, feasible. If you want to do things in planning, I believe in community planning, those things can only be done with the support of the community. I attended the same workshop as Mike did. I can't remember how many years ago. I dug out the booklet the other day, and those fors and against about that issue were discussed. And the clear consensus was no, that we should live within our means as far as parking is concerned and manage it. But, ultimately, in the end, if one went off on a spaceship and came back in St Albans in 30 years' time, it depends on what people at the time, if they want to see the harbour ruined, if they want to see the village change its category forever, then go for that refit, that landfill. I'd be very surprised if they do that. Here we've got an historic harbour, one of the important heritage harbour, the original harbour of Jersey, absolutely loaded with heritage all around there. My concern is we don't make enough of it. Just look at these lovely stone bollards and these things like that. We're not interpreting it enough. And I'm very unhappy with the ports of Jersey in the way they allow it to deteriorate and not look after it properly. So those are the things I'd like to see. But managing parking, I think, is Mike's approach. My watch. Are there any other questions? Because if there aren't, I will bring the meeting to a close, unless you would like each successful candidate to sum up in a couple of minutes, but I don't think we need to do that, do we? Yeah. So do we have any further questions? No. Okay, well... Can we go home, please? Well, I didn't ask any questions. I was chairing the meeting, making sure that you all had your questions answered. Can I thank you all for coming? Can I thank the two successful Constable-elect and Deputy-elect, Jackson and Young, for coming tonight. Thank you for coming. I didn't think we'd get as many questions as we did, but we did. So 10 out of 10 to all 10 of you who are here tonight. And I thank everyone for coming.